Welcome to BK Academy of Chess. In this video we continue our series on the Nimzo-Indian Defense by completing our discussion of the Rubinstein System in the spirit of the Nimzo-Indian favored by Nimzo himself, where black plays b6, on move 4. Black is preparing to fight for control over e4, by fianchettoing his light-squared bishop. This would be a great time to exercise your planning skills by pausing the video to come up with a continuation for white. Okay, now let's continue. White usually continues knight e2, avoiding the double of pawns, or bishop d3, continuing his development, and knight f3, usually transposes. For all the Bobby Fischer fans, we have the Fischer variation knight e2, bishop a6, aiming to exchange light-squared bishops after d5, so that black can play on the light squares. As white, Botanic favored playing a3, putting the question to the bishop on b4, to clarify its intentions. Reshevsky favored playing knight g3, to prepare for e4. The Romanishin-Psakhis variation dubbed by Karsten Hansen follows knight e2, c5, a3, bishop a5. Black dares white to try and trap the bishop on a5, and white usually accepts the challenge but is rarely successful. The American variation is another name invented by Hansen for the line knight e2, knight e4. Black fights to keep control of e4, by planning to exchange off two minor pieces, then play f5. A rather passive line for black is knight e2, bishop b7. Now how should white play? Pause the video if you need time to think. White seems to obtain a slight advantage by continuing with a3, bishop e7, d5, blocking in the bishop on b7, and making possible the e4 push. The classical fianchetto variation, also known as the Tal variation, bishop d3, bishop b7, knight f3, castle kingside. Castle kingside. d5, it is a highly respected variation. In the early stages white often holds the initiative, but in the end black usually equalizes. Here, how should white play? White has two ways to launch an attack on black. The first is to play c takes d5, e takes d5, knight e5, followed by f4, and transferring the queen or f1 rook to h3, via f3. In this formation, known as the Pillsbury attack, black must create immediate pressure on white's center by playing c5, and at some point knight e4, may be a handy move to block the b1 to h7 diagonal and perhaps exchange some pieces. The main alternative for white is a3, bishop d6, c takes d5, e takes d5, b4, which gains space on the queen side and makes it harder for black to free his position with c5. The Ker's variation, characterized by the moves bishop d3, bishop b7, knight f3, castle kingside, c5. Black intends on playing c takes d4 and d5, in the hope of leaving white with an isolated queen's pawn. White's most testing continuation is considered to be knight a4, ducking the exchange on c3, and threatening a3. The knight will often stay on a4 for quite some time, to prepare the c5 push. After c takes d4, e takes d4, black often sets up a hedgehog formation with pawns on a6, b6, d6, and e6, while white will try to pursue a strategy of gaining queenside space with b4 and c5. The not-so-popular Dutch variation runs bishop d3, bishop b7, knight f3, knight e4, where black usually follows up with f5. How do you think white should respond to this line? Hint: for white to obtain good chances, he must find a way to open up lines for his bishops. White sacrifices a pawn to open up lines by playing castle kingside. e5, d5. This completes our series on the Rubinstein system of the Nimzo-Indian Defense. In part 1, we discussed the basic ideas behind the Nimzo-Indian Defense, and the main line where black castles immediately on move 4, and white plays his kingside knight to f3. In part 2, we continued with black castling on move 4 but with white playing his knight to e2, to prevent the doubling of pawns on the c-file. In part 3, we took a look at how the Rubinstein system plays when white pushes c5, on move 4. And this is part 4, completing our discussion of the Rubinstein system in the spirit of the Nimzo-Indian favored by Nimzo himself, where black plays b6, on move 4. Thank you for tuning into BK Academy of Chess, and I hope you enjoyed the video.